Hey, sorry I'm a little late. Yeah, my OBS crashed. I never had that happen before, but like literally my OBS just poof, crashed, had some weird flickering, vanished. I tried to call it back up. It wouldn't let me do any output. I reinstalled it, had to put a virtual camera back on, but it seems to be working now. So, a little late, but hi all. It is Friday. It is time for controversy. And tonight, I kind of want to talk about controversy that's kind of been off and on for a while. Deals with a couple different players from Twitter that you might know. Just recently, not too long ago, Apologia was talking about this, and S.J. Thomason was talking about it. And I think it's an ongoing discussion that needs to be continually had because it is called argument from religious experience. And I think a lot of people have a lot of misunderstandings when it comes to what the theist is arguing when they talk about religion, religious experience being some kind of evidential thing to themselves to justify or warrant a type of belief. So what I figured I'd kind of do tonight is talk about the controversy of, first, is religious experience, and I'm not talking about like a mystical experience. I'm not talking about that, or spiritual experience. I'm talking about an actual religious experience, what they deem to be a religious experience. There's a slight difference between these things, but generally, a lot of people can have mystical experiences or spiritual experiences where they don't attribute to any kind of supernatural causation. Generally, religious experience would be something along the lines of supernatural. And so it keeps kind of getting brought up of, is a theist, justified to have sufficient warrant to believe in God? And if so, is it credible that it is based upon personal experience, right? And so I think there's two things at play here. I kind of want to go over them and kind of get what you think, and then if you guys want to join in, I have a room open, and you can ask me for the link, or just put it in the live chat. It's fine. But there's two things at play. Obviously, there's the justificatory conditions to themselves, right? This is what they have sufficient warrant for themselves to say, hey, look, I believe that there's a God. If they can meet those justifications, right? If they seem reasonable, rational, they're not basing upon irrationality. They're not saying, hey, look, I went outside and this grasshopper told me there's a God, therefore I believe there's a God. That would probably be considered or construed as an irrational warrant or justification. And if they have sufficient reasons, then are they justified? Now, I personally hold that they are, right? I don't think that we should be so strict in the uses of justification by what we consider to be sufficient, as opposed to individual levels what you think is justificatory. One of the reasons I say that is because if a person has what's called coherence theory, if something gels with their web of beliefs, then to them it might be justified, right? If somebody actually does have a lot of beliefs that, hey, look, there's more to the universe than we let on, there's possible supernatural causation, they believe in spirituality, then it would be coherent with their beliefs that if they had something that they would construe as a religious experience, they would be justified to believe God exists. However, to somebody like an atheist, who their web of belief might be completely different, if they have a one-off religious experience, they may not think it's sufficient enough to justify. Now, continuing along those lines, though, for the internal justification for the theist to believe this, my argument is kind of twofold. One, I do believe that they are justified. Okay, that's fine. But it does raise the question, how do you get from a religious experience to God? Now, personally, when I thought I had a religious experience, I made the connection that wasn't there. I mean, did I experience something? Yes. So the first thing that we have to accept, to have the cooperative principle, we're talking about these experiences, we have to assume that the person is being honest in their discussion, right? They're not making up the story. So like when S.J. Thomason says that she says something, I completely believe that she experienced something. Okay? I have no reason to doubt her sincerity on that whatsoever. So we have to assume that billions of people that are having experiences, they're not making it up. Now, some of them do, absolutely, right? But no, I don't think all of them do. But I don't even think a large majority of them do. I think a lot of them experience something. We just don't know what it is. I've experienced things. You've experienced things. How we interpret it, that is basically how we have a coherent belief system, right? It has to gel with things that we've experienced before. And so in S.J. Thomason's experience, her experiences have been that because she has a religious experience, where she hears a voice or heard voice, that justifies her belief in God. Now, the counter argument I had to this is, what's the connection to God? Because I've heard audible hallucinations. I know other people have heard audible hallucinations. We're not talking about schizophrenia. We're talking about what's called hypnagogia, which is basically your either sleep apnea or sleep paralysis, or some kind of lucid state where you're hearing things because your brain is pretty well active, even though you're starting to fall into REM sleep. And so this is a very common experience. It's nothing supernatural about it. But I'm not saying that's what's happened to Esther. I'm not trying to make that argument. I'm just saying that I assume that she has experienced something. I experienced something when I thought, about joining the Mormon Church, right? I felt what I thought was a religious experience. Like my whole body was basically on fire. My eyes were closed, and I could actually, if somebody puts a bright light in front of your eyes and your eyes are closed, you see like the pink, right? Like if you look at the sun through closed eyes, you can actually like see the pink of your eyes. It was like that. Even though my eyes were shut, there was no bright light or anything like that. And to this day, I don't have a rational explanation for it. I don't have a coherent explanation that coincides with my belief system. But it does an experience that did happen. And it was happening during a blessing from my friend's mom. Now, when I go back and analyze that, right, and this would be something similar that whoever wants to run an argument from a religious experience would want to run. When I go back and analyze that, I have to think to myself, how did I ever get to the conclusion that it was God? And even more specifically, how did I get to the conclusion it was Christianity? Now, one could argue, well, it was doing, a Christian type ceremony kind of thing or blessing. Okay. But at the same token, other people have religious experiences that are not Christian oriented, right? One of the defeaters to the argument from religious experience is the fact that there is so much diversification in these types of experience. And what we would expect, again, we have to look at what is called expected values. We have to look at prior experiences and what we'd expect as evidence if it was the case. I have no prior experiences, right? That was my only one. We have nothing to draw upon of what would be considered evidential religious experiences. So we don't know even what to expect. But to make the connection there, somebody else can make the same connection that it was some other God, right? I mean, if it was someone in another country, clearly they would believe that it was some other God that was causing this. That's because of their culture. Completely understandable, right? So there would have to be some objective measure by which I can say, okay, I've had a religious experience. Somebody else has had a religious experience. What's the commonality between them, right? Now, I personally think there's a pretty good chance that there is some fact of the matter to be had. People have experienced things, and whether that is because of a supernatural causation, I don't know. But I think as humans, we tend to experience similar things, right? Because I have a lucid dream, I could therefore draw inference that somebody else has lucid dreams, right? So I think there's a commonality of experiences, but what I disagree on is how you get to the conclusion of it being a specific type of deity. The only way you can get that is if somebody tells you. There's no a priori knowledge to be had there. It's all a posteriori by observations of our society in some way, right? I mean, we're looking at what people tell us. We say, hey, when I had my experience, I was like, what's going on? And I thought maybe, but somebody said, yeah, you know what, that's the Holy Ghost. And I was like, oh, I was 17. I was like, okay, well, that makes sense. That's, burning feeling, blah, blah, blah. But not many other people experience it like that. And when other people have a religious experience and they say, well, yeah, that was the Holy Ghost for this particular denomination. Well, if the Holy Ghost is supposed to be giving you truth, and it's telling somebody one thing in some denomination, and it's telling somebody else in another denomination something else, or not telling, I should say experiencing. Let's say you have person A who's, I don't know, Protestant, and person B who's, Lutheran or Orthodox or Buddhist or whatever. Well, I guess that would be a Christian religion, but if they're both having a similar experience and they both say, hey, look, I felt what I believe the Holy Ghost is showing, that would be to them saying, hey, what I believe is true, right? It's a confirmation to them that what they believe is true, even though both cannot be true at the same time. There's competing positions in specific religions and even throughout any kind of theism that they cannot be both true. Judaism and Christianity both cannot be true. Either Christ was the Son of God or he was not the Son of God, right? Either Judaism is true or it's not true. But you can't have a Jewish religion and then say, yes, well, Christ was also the Son of God, right? I mean, it just doesn't mesh, right? Whether one or true or the other. It's called contraries. So I think that, yes, people are internalized to justify belief in God, but I think there's a right people have to kind of ask them, well, I hate to use the word right, but I think that people should be able to attack those justificatory conditions. This is the whole principle behind street epistemology, right? That, hey, you're really justified to have this particular position. And I think that's a fair question to ask. I think it's a very fair question to ask people. How did you arrive at it being, the experience you had, the religious experience you had, being the deity that you picked, or the particular denomination of a deity you picked, right? And more specific, I think when people talk about justificatory conditions, a lot of them confuse burden of persuasion with burden of proof to oneself. And I think Plantinga does use the term warrant to basically mean justification to oneself. I have never confirmed that. I think Plantinga is a little vague on that, but it would make sense if warrant is basically where it relates some kind of data to your own personal viewpoint. But I think they argue, hey, look, you can't use your own personal testimony to persuade somebody else. And that is true to a point. Now, I talked to like Dr. Fuzrana, and I used a term called non-transportable justification. And this is a term that I came up with. It basically just means that you're just dosastically you cannot transport your personal first-person justification to somebody else. There's an inherent disconnect there, right? Because you're trying to convey your experience through words rather than them experience what you've experienced, right? So they can't experience it because it's subjective. It's not objective. It's definitely subjective. You've experienced it, and you can't show them what you felt. You can't have them experience what you felt, but then to draw their own inference. And so it weighs against a lot of negative evidence. So if I have an experience, and I say to Cheshire, or I say to Estee Thomason, hey, I've had this experience. Let me tell you about my experience. Now they can say, look, I trust you, Steve. You've always been cool and honest, and I think you've experienced something. I think you're drawing a malformed inference, though it being a deity or God or some kind of supernatural causation, which is fine. But I'm limited in my approach to persuade them by the mere fact that I cannot transport my subjectivity to them. Now, they can decide to believe, right? They can say, hey, look, I totally believe you. Our kids do this all the time with their parents, right? They trust their parents implicitly. So if a parent says, hey, look, this is the religion of our family, this is true, the child is more than often going to rely upon the parents because they haven't formulated their own cognitive functions well enough, their own executive decision-making abilities to formulate a belief to themselves. So they rely on other people. This is normal behavior. In which case, they're relying on somebody else's testimony. But when we rely on somebody else's testimony, obviously we know testimony is unreliable. So why do we make an exception for Christianity? Why do Christians say, hey, look, I look at Peter, I read the apostles, I believe their testimony? But one, testimony has been throughout the ages in many different religions, right? What is it about this testimony that you accept but not somebody else's testimony? And what is making that testimony powerful enough for you to determine that this is exactly the deity that they're talking about? Because again, if you accept one person's testimony, why not accept somebody else's person's testimony? And is that sufficient warrant to believe? To oneself, perhaps. Again, I think it boils down to coherency, right? If it gels with their existing framework of beliefs, their existing web of beliefs, then perhaps they are justified as individuals for an internal critique to say to them, okay, I believe you're justified. In other words, if Jesse Thomason had told me, hey, look, God exists because, like I said, I went outside and a cricket told me, God exists, I'm going to probably not think she's rational to make that decision that God exists. And I think she's going to have an unjustified position. But her experiences are her own. And so when the question comes up, is personal experience sufficient justification to believe God exists? There's two folds of that question. There's two parts to it. Well, do you mean internally to somebody individually? If that's the case, then I think the arguments atheists have that like theists are delusional is a very bad argument, right? One, when an atheist or a non-believer says that a theist is delusional because they believe in God, they're suggesting there's a malfunctioning of the mind. They're saying that something's not working correctly. And just because you have a bad belief or a false belief, if that was the case, does not mean your mind is malfunctioning. It just means you reached a bad conclusion from whatever methods that you used. That's it, right? So if their decision-making ability was even a little bit compromised, but they still got to a conclusion, without having some fundamental material defect of the mind or physical defect of the brain then they're not delusional. It's just not. It's just an unjustified belief, or it's a justified belief because they've in their own personal experience, they've in their minds told themselves this is a sufficient reason or explanation for my religious experience. Then again, you ask them, well, how did you get to God though on it? There could be a lot of different explanations for it. We've never seen a God be an explanation for anything. So I know that's just kind of my thoughts on the matter. I think a lot of people also. I was going to talk about this a little bit before I kind of reach the outside here. I see you guys messaging me, and I will get to you in a second here. But there's an old saying out there which I really dislike. It's called "extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence," and I used to kind of go with it, but then I really did kind of think about it a little bit more. And there's two reasons why I don't like that particular phrase. I think it's catchy, but it doesn't really apply. One, in science is objective. And as we know, science adheres to methodological naturalism, so it excludes any type of God or any kind of supernatural causation for a natural phenomenon. Because that's the case, then you can't introduce subjectivity to science. You can't say, hey, this is an extraordinary claim. Well, what do you mean by extraordinary claim? That's a subjective word inherently, right? It's what do you find to be extraordinary as compared to ordinary? To me, I think that's a good argument that when we're looking at claims, it shouldn't matter whether it's extraordinary or not, because I don't know what that would mean. And let me give you a perfect example. If I say, hey, I have a dog, okay, it's pretty easy to get that evidence, right? And so I can actually show you I have a dog. But if I say, hey, aliens exist, I don't think it's any more extraordinary. What it is it's more difficult to get the evidence for it. All right? There's two things. It's more difficult to get the evidence for it, and we have less priors to believe. You've all seen dogs before. So when I say I have a dog, well, it's not my dog, but my landlord's dog, there's less requirements for evidence only because what's the best explanation, right? Science tries to come up with the best abductive argument, the best explanation for a phenomenon. That's what it does. We have no other explanations that have been other than natural so far, which does kind of lead into the argument. Well, we've had gods being posited for natural phenomenon, like Thor for lightning and Poseidon for tidal waves and stuff like that. Okay, fair enough. But I think it is a bad argument when we say just because the priors have been that historically speaking, these gods have turned out not to be the case, or at least we found naturalistic explanations. It doesn't necessitate that it wasn't a god. What it just means is it's more likely the case that we found a natural explanation because that's what we're looking for science. So even though all these different God claims that we see, all these different experiences, all these different religious experiences we see, whether they're actual experiences or people lying, let's assume that they're actual experiences. Most of the time when people have looked into them, they have found they're probably not the case, right? They found other explanations. Not always, but a lot of times. But you can't make the argument just because we found natural explanations for what people have considered to be natural religious experiences, it doesn't disprove there's a God. It just shows that people are probably more likely incorrect if they have a religious experience than correct, only because we have low priors. But we have nothing to draw upon. And also, I can also say as a non-resistant non-believer, there's a concept of divine hiddenness, where if God exists, why is he not showing himself to certain people the same way? Right? I mean, if I'm a non-resistant non-believer, and just say Cheshire's a non-resistant non-believer, we should have similar religious experiences. But we find that we don't really have that. We have very different experiences, even among religious people. There's very little commonality. So I think that's another argument to say, okay, well, is that person justified to believe God is the explanation for their religious experience? Again, I'm not going to really fault somebody if they believe that is sufficient justification for them. I don't think we have a say in that matter. I think that's solely really dependent upon the person. We can just kind of guide them a little bit. We can say, hey, look, clearly I don't think you have sufficient cause, but if they do have a good argument for it, if they're of sound mind, that's fine. Yeah. Like S.J. Thomason, she's justified to believe God exists. Great. I have no problem with that. But if she wants to convince somebody else, then the non-transportability of these justifications, or the non-transportable justification, doesn't really persuade many people. And I think SJ would probably agree with that. Her testimony may not really persuade many people, because then they're relying not on the faith that God exists, they're relying on the faith that SJ's experience is what she said it was. And I hope that makes sense, because again, I totally believe SJ has had these experiences. And I'm just kind of picking SJ because it's a great example, because she was talking about this not too long ago on Twitter, like she usually does. So what do you guys think about this? So that's the kind of the controversy I want to throw out there. Is a personal experience sufficient justification to believe in God for oneself? And is it used to convince somebody else as a burden of persuasion? And if so, why does God use that? I mean, why is God using one of the most, ineffective means to convince somebody is basically a testimony when you're dealing with something with very low priors, with something very low evidential experience with. So let me look in here real quick. Yes, I see all you tagging me. So SJ says, that can be explained by Psalms 82, counsel sons of God. Not sure what that refers to, but I don't think the Bible really explains any of that. I mean, again, just say, hey, look, the Bible explains this. Well, does it really? No, it coheres. I mean, it's part of your coherence of your web of beliefs. But you can't. The Psalms doesn't tell me anything. And I'm not sure what Psalms 82 is, but I can look it up here in a minute. Linguist says there's such thing as Masonic Judaism, but the line between it and other oddly Jewish-like sects of Christianity seems quite thin to me. Yeah, well, there's also Christian Jews, right? But they're Christian Jews in the fact that they're Jewish by religion, but they hold to many of Christ's supposed tenets and ideology. But they're effectively, religiously speaking, Jewish, right? God Scummer. Hi, only joined, but given the question of the stream title, I'll just say that personal experience were a big part of my favorite or former paganism. Yeah, and again, you have to allow for that, right? Are people allowed to be justified for paganism? Yeah. If your web of belief is such that you are tending toward Norse gods, then yeah, you're justified to believe that Thor exists. If you can make a coherent argument about why you think that is the case for whatever it is you're trying to explain. My coherency, right, it wouldn't allow for that, right? If I saw lightning, it would go against my coherent theory of justification to say, yeah, that lightning was probably caused by Thor, right? It doesn't gel. Thomason says, I want to know the whole story. I want to be likely to believe, since I would not see any good reason for him to lie. But here's Thomason. What I want to know is, how do you draw the conclusion between a religious experience? Right? Let's say, even if Satan came to you and said, hey, yo, look, I'm Satan, I exist. How does that tell you what version of God to believe? It doesn't. It just simply doesn't. It's all it is it tells you, hey, there's some being here. It's calling itself Satan for whatever reason. Now, sure, it might be more likelihood if there's a Satan. Sure, you make the argument if there's a Satan, there's probably a God, but which version of God? I've never heard any theists really give me a sufficient argument of how they justify the particular, theology based upon any kind of religious experience. She says, I had talked about this sometime. Psalms 82 shows us that the sons of God were allotted certain lands in ancient times. Jesus was awarded the world at the resurrection. I'm not sure how that applies. At Pentecost, Jesus sent apostles out to reclaim lands. Yeah, I'm not sure that applies. Depending on how exactly you define evidence, this is atheist linguist. Depending on how you exactly define evidence, I think you can actually derive Sagan's razor from Bayes' theorem. Well, here's the thing. Evidence, generally in science, is that which raises or lowers the expectations of a hypothesis to being more true or less true, right? So evidence would be something that changes your likelihood at which you can reject the null. If I have something that says it is more likely an explanation that my hypothesis is the case, as opposed to some kind of null hypothesis, that's what evidence would be, in scientifically speaking. Bayes' theorem, though, requires, like I said, past priors for expected values. If I have no priors to draw upon, from supernatural causation or a God is very difficult, even with Sagan's razor, even with some kind of extraordinary claims, to just say, what is our expectations? What is our expected values to be had here? If somebody says God exists, okay, what is our expectations? I don't know. If we have aliens, what are our expectations? Well, we should see some kind of, if they're intelligent, if they're civilized, maybe some byproducts of civilizations. We know that our civilization produces greenhouse gases. We know that we have Morse code and we have signals that we send out, radio waves. We would maybe expect, just because of our own experience, right? We have to draw on our own experience that maybe an alien race would have something along those lines. So we have some kind of expectation to draw from. So if we saw a civilization out in space, we saw a signal from some civilization, and the signal was some kind of, repeating type Fibonacci sequence, or giving out all the prime numbers, it is more likely the case that that is an intelligent agency behind it by some kind of natural phenomenon. Why? Because we've never seen natural phenomena be able to do something like that. We wouldn't expect natural phenomenon to do something like that. Now, could it produce something with the Fibonacci series? Yeah, golden ratio, right, or something like that. So, sure, we can see, periodic events like with neutron stars and pulsars. But to have a signal that actually have informational value to it that actually could be decoded and give us information of a very specific nature, yeah, that's only going to be coming from some kind of intelligence. That would be our expectations. But then we can say, okay, we expect this, we see the signal, we can probably derive that this is from some kind of alien life, intelligent life. I'm still missing the connection by which we have any kind of experience, religious or otherwise, where we can draw that inference where it is a God is that explanation. Mir says, I base my theology on the academic sources. Religious experience doesn't get a person to what theology is correct. Well, that's true. But here's the thing. I personally hold that the only reason a person would really believe in God per se, well, I should say the only reason, but a significant reason is personal justification, personal sufficient experience. I do hold that. The reason being is all we have is our sense perception. And why would a person believe God exists without having some kind of experience, whether it be directly relating to a religious experience or experience relating to other people, right? Relying on them to believe. If somebody just was born and they were wandering around, I don't see how they would ever get to the point where they would find like some kind of Christianity. It wouldn't ever occur to them, right? That the whole story behind Christianity would not occur to them. It just couldn't occur to them, right? Because they believe there's some kind of existence, some kind of mind. They know they exist, and they can say, look, I exist. And again, I don't know how they would do this if they were brought up, on some desert island that never talked to a single human being. But hypothetically, they could deduce that they exist, that some other being exists. Right. Okay, that's fair. We've experienced minds. We know minds can exist, but we've never experienced a non-corporeal mind, right? We never experienced a mind without a physical substrate to it. Let me get you guys some links here. If people want links. Yes, you can have links. Of course you can have links. Links for everybody. Join. Come on in. There you go. That's the link. Come on in. So what do you guys think on this? Do you think, okay, first let's talk about the internal justifications. Do you guys think that a theist can be justified to believe in God? Or do you think that it's absolutely no way possible? Any theist that believes in God is just delusional. Press 1 if you think that, sure, to themselves, a theist can be justified to believe God exists. And then 2 if you think there's no possible way. And then we'll kind of expand upon that because, for one, like I said, if you think that there's no possible way, I think that's a really bad argument because you're just basically saying that a false belief is never justifiable. And I think that's wrong. There actually are theories out there to say that having a false belief is actually beneficial sometimes, or not only that, but perfectly justified. It doesn't mean it's true, obviously, but it means it's justified. So hey, we have an atheist in here. They do exist, and by the way, she's not a rock.
Are you sure? I'm all gray like a rock.
Yeah.
I'm gray, therefore I am a rock.
How are you?
Is that how that works? I got some wine. It's pretty good.
I got some coffee.
A little tired. I'm falling apart today.
Are you? You're
For
getting
no
old.
reason.
See what happens?
I'm just tired.
I'm telling you, reach a certain age, it's all downhill. You guys don't believe me. So what do you think about this? Give me your opinion on this about internal justifications versus external.
Okay. My opinion essentially follows along the lines of people should just be consistent internally and externally. So however you scrutinize what you do and do not believe based on external factors, those factors should also apply to whatever you're experiencing internally. So if you experience something or somebody tells you that they've experienced something, the same amount of scrutiny should be given to both, and then of course scaled depending on how extreme the thing is that they're talking about. If they're talking about getting abducted by aliens, and you're going to be a little bit more like, no, were you though? If you experience getting abducted by aliens, maybe you should also be like, did I though?
No, I agree with you. I think both parties should attack their justifications
Right.
and say, okay, did this really happen, right? We all know somebody, Nephilim Free, who believes that he was abducted. I mean, in the middle of the night, he thinks that aliens came down and had their way with him or something. I don't know. But did that really happen? Probably not, right? Probably not. And the reason we also know that Nephili's not really the sanest of people, and we also know that he just doesn't know science. He doesn't know a lot of these things. So the likelihood of his story being what it was, the verticality of that particular story of him being
Right.
aliens come and visit him in the middle of the night, probably not the case, right? Probably was a lucid dream. But a religious person would call that not aliens. They would say, hey, look, in the middle of the night, I was visited by angels, right?
Sure, yeah. I would say that the same thing should apply to other religions. If you're going to say that, hey, I'm an atheist and I very much scrutinize Christianity or Allah, whatever, I should also apply that to being an atheist. Why am I an atheist and what are my reasonings? That just same way you should be, hey, this person's a theist, why don't I think they're a theist? Like, what have I thought through? And it should apply to both. Same way as if you're a Christian and you're questioning Islam and you're scrutinizing Islam, you should apply that same scrutiny to your own Christianity, because all it's going to do is make either your faith or your belief stronger, or it's going to make you feel different about it, but it'll make you more confident, period. At least just be internally consistent.
Yeah,
Please.
analyze
For the love of
your
God.
beliefs. Sure.
Consistency. All I ask for.
So, like for example, when I had my religious experience, what I thought was a religious experience, and I think there's probably was a natural explanation, but whatever. I was told what it was, right, and I had to make that connection through other people. Now I look back and I think to myself, look, I've never seen Jesus, never talked to Jesus, never had any relationship with Jesus, never had this personal.
That's only because you're racist. You don't know enough Mexican people.
I think he doesn't like Jews, but whatever. Well, I mean, I don't know. The Jews were the chosen people, so I should automatically be covered, according to some people. Right? It depends on who you ask. I've actually had people say, "Look, gee, you're
Right.
Jewish, therefore you're good to go," and I'm like, "Really? That's cool." I have a friend, Dr. Kenny Rhodes, who I adore, and I was having lunch with him one day, and he said the most oddest thing I've ever heard an atheist say. He's like, "Hey, Steve, I really wouldn't want to believe in a God that would send you to hell."
Aww.
I was like, "I love you, man." He's, it was really nice, right? I mean, he was just like, look, I don't think that God is going to like send people to hell because they don't believe, which is a rare thing, right?
I think people forget that there's also a whole nother piece of this to say that, let's say that something happened that was convincing. God poofed, whichever, take your pick. We'll say the Abrahamic religion God.
Hang on a sec, Steve. I'll get you in here in a sec.
Poofed into existence and put everybody's all of the information into people's brains, and now everybody believes and everybody knows for a fact that this is the case. Like he's proven it as to the best that is possibly able to be proven. There's a next step. Now you could either go into denial, or you could go into you could be like, okay, well, this exists, now what? Because there's a whole other step to being like, well, if God exists,
But
would you worship him?
well,
And now you got to start considering the morality of this deity of like,
well, yeah, no,
should he be?
yeah, sure, I would. I mean, because I mean, people, I think people would be like, yeah, you're going to worship even if he would be a bad being. You still would be like, look, I'm fearful of the
I have
alternative.
no choice.
You have no choice, right? It's just,
I don't know. I'm pretty much a dick, so I'd probably be like, at me, bro.
yeah,
Fine.
well, yeah, but if we all say
Fine.
that, but people have been broke under physical torture would probably be a lot less than some kind of metaphysical torture. So I don't.
Yeah, but you're already dead.
True.
And like the torture's for eternity. Like eventually you're gonna get bored.
Well, the same argument there's actually an argument he had in the opposite too, that
Exactly.
if you're in
it
heaven,
goes both ways.
right there, I don't want to do any spoilers, but there was a show that was the very premise. If they're in heaven, then they eventually just ran out of things to do. They got bored.
Yeah,
there was no purpose.
Bored.
But anyway,
Yeah.
Steve, what do you want to add?
Well, you mentioned Kenny Rhodes said doesn't want to see you go to hell or doesn't believe. That's just basically universalism.
It's similar. Yeah, I mean, I know there's different types of universalism. Now, generally, most universalists definitely think that most people, everybody's kind of saved, but some of them do actually have some conditions that they have. Like people go through some kind of I don't want to call it purgatory, but they go through some kind of hell before they're actually saved. So it depends on your type of universalism.
Yeah, I guess you could say more or less along the lines of the temporary purging part, and in the end, everybody will be restored.
I don't understand that though. That would make no sense to me. I mean, it's like, okay, you died, you go through this purge. They say don't do it again. You were bad in your life. Now you go to heaven. And then for eternity, that small part of purging kind of thing, what good is that going to do?
Well, let me backtrack. Well, if there is, it would be along the lines, at least that's what I read from Hart, though I'd have to reread his book again.
Yeah.
But patristic universalism basically is that God created everything for a reason, and yeah, everybody's in a corrupt state, but in the end, he's restoring it all to him in the end, including those who are still stuck in that form of privation or sin.
Yeah, so there's some that'll say that, oh, once you're in hell long enough, you're not in hell anymore, and God's like, you change your mind yet?
Well,
you
some
can
just
come
say
out of time out if you decide to eat the chocolate ice cream.
Some just actually do think that hell is just privation from God, right? It's not just necessarily like fire and brimstone, which again, I denounce that particular version of hell. Not privation from God, I can understand, or annihilation, but
if God showed up and it was the one that's in like the King James Bible, I would be very confused. Like I would have so many questions. I would be like, okay, hold on. I might worship you, but give me like a week and a half because I'm gonna be doing nothing but writing out questions, and I'm just gonna be like, okay, so what?
Okay, so let me ask you this:
so what?
Because there's so much inconsistency out there, right?
Right?
Could it possibly be that there is some being, right? Again, I'm only agnostic for the fact that if there's a God, I think there's a God that did everything, right? As a metaphysical necessity, if that's the case. But I think that everybody who has a belief about God has gotten it wrong, right? I literally think that there's not a single person who ever lived that ever got the facts right. I just don't see it possible.
What, like all of the facts, or even just one of the facts?
All of the facts.
Except for the fact that God would created things.
Yeah, they might get that right? So I mean, some might have a little bit more, some might have a little bit left. But God, if God exists, He's basically looking at everybody and saying, "Look, all you guys are wrong, but I want you guys to come up with your own positions on this and see where it kind of leads you." But in the end, it doesn't matter. Like for example, universalism, because if God wants people to know that He exists, I just find it really weird that He's using it by such ineffective means as like testimony, right? Because people are relying on testimony of people that died years ago. These are stories that have been changed. These are dissimilar stories, which is a big problem. But for people that say, hey, look, I want to believe God, but I don't want to trust in these other people. You're trusting the word of man, right?
That's always been my problem, is inconsistency. Inconsistencies everywhere. Look at them all. They're all over the place. Why? Why is this thing? Stop doing that thing. Triangles didn't exist until the Illuminati showed up?
Yeah, well, you know me, I don't think triangles do exist, but but that's okay.
Triangles aren't real.
Yeah.
They were all made up by the Illuminati.
Now, again, that's just a philosophical stance, right? I mean, I actually like mereological nihilism. To be honest with you, I don't think that it's hard to even say what anything does exist. I mean, because they're just recombinations of primitives. So, I mean, like, yeah, okay, does this cup exist?
We're all made up of earth.
It's just a reorganization of stuff. So, what makes it a cup?
Well, can you get to the bottom of infinity?
Yeah, it's mereological nihilism is amazing because you think to yourself, what the hell does exist? I mean,
I got a kick out of studying philosophy when I was in university. Oh, yeah, believe it or not, I went to university. It happened. It was in Toronto. It was for a BA in English, and I was there for 2 weeks, and I was just like, this place, and I left. But I did get like 3 classes of philosophy, and in one of those classes, they were telling us about like old school philosophy about how everything is made up of air, earth, water, and fire, and that's what they thought it was.
Yeah.
And I was like, hey, how interesting would it be is if we got small enough and it turned out that everything is actually just made up of air, earth, water, and fire at the end, ultimately.
Well, those were the four primitives, right? But I mean, we
Right.
People would say, look, we know
I think
atoms
some
exist.
people added like spirit or something to it.
Yeah, spirit, yeah. But I mean, when you really think about it, and this goes into the whole philosophy of mind too. If the mind has some kind of physical substrate, the physicality exists. How much dependency is our consciousness depending on our physical states? Because we know physicality can change our mental states, but you can't really say mental states change our physicality, but in a way that they do, right? I have a mental state. I want to think of an action. I do that action. It changes a mental state, and people can make themselves sick, right? So we have to be able to explain how a mental action can cause physical changes. That's the biggest problem in the mind-body problem. But I think we got atheist linguist in here, didn't we? Did he join?
Yeah, he's there.
Hi.
Is this atheist linguist?
Yeah. Hi.
Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yes, sir. Is this atheist linguist or somebody
Okay,
else?
Good.
It is. It's atheist linguist.
Okay.
This is atheist linguist. Yes.
Okay. Now you have a background in what's the word? Linguology?
You have a background in linguistics.
What's the linguistics? Linguistics. Right?
Yeah.
So what were you saying?
And that I just well I just wanted to give my 2 cents here. There are 2 points I want to make. First, I think a major problem for me is when someone has a personal experience and then they conclude that God exists, and then they very often skip over the step of eliminating all the more plausible explanations.
Oh, I agree with you on that. No, I think
Right.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And that's what I think Cheshire kind of alluded to that before. Okay, let me ask you that. Why do you think that is, though? For example, like
if I may,
Yeah,
I think a big reason is that our culture has tended to condition people against realizing just how improbable the God hypothesis really is.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah, I see what you're saying.
I don't know.
Yeah,
I don't know if about probability. I think I think it probably is low. I'll give you that. I think it's lower than 50%, right? But I think you're right. For personal to have a personalized justification, I do think it's obligatory to try to eliminate other naturalistic causes as abductive argument
yeah.
for what we'd experience. I think that's perfectly fine. But for example, like I used to use a Ouija board, right? And I gotta tell you, dude, that thing
Like
moves.
a Hasbro one?
Don't judge me.
Yeah.
Don't just,
Oh,
don't-
I'm judging you.
don't
I'm judging you harder than God is.
But I'm telling you, it moves. I mean, it's not the other person. It's move. I've used it by myself. It's the Ideomoty effect or whatever. But I mean, it's very convincing, right? I mean, very, very convincing. So unless you know what the Ideomoty effect is, or you would probably be like, hey, look, what is my expectation if this thing actually does contact some kind of spirit? Well, it would be communicating to me. It would give me things that would be writing out, which it does. That'd be an expectation. So if somebody says, look, I believe the Ouija board works, because I honestly, for a very long time, believe the Ouija board works. Matter of fact, I still go, hey, this is pretty impressive. But I think it is something in your mind that's, doing a lot of it, right? So I do think there's a naturalistic explanation for it, but it is very convincing. So for somebody to say, hey, look, I believe spirit boards work, they would be justified if they don't really have any alternative natural explanation, or if it congeals with existing coherency of their justificatory webs of belief.
Okay, but Steve, you've run into another problem, which is essentially that you can only know as much as the information that you have. So if people don't know that you're likely to move your hand if you're just standing there, then it's likely that you're going to jump to a different conclusion, or a conclusion that you are aware of, not one you aren't aware of because you don't know what you don't know. On the other hand, when it comes to probability and likelihood, I think one of the main reasons why that I would agree with linguists is that you do see people using that all of the time. Like, what's the likelihood that you sneezed today? It's a bajillion thousand Brazilians, whatever.
She's making up numbers now.
I'm just making up words. So it's a matter of, if people are going to throw that out, which they do regularly. One, a lot of people don't understand statistics and probability to begin with, so they can't know what they don't know. So they're jumping to a conclusion, or they're jumping to something that they do know, which is that it's very unlikely that all of these things came together, and it seems far more likely that one thing happened than all of these other things, even though they kind of line up together and it's really only one thing.
Yeah. People have been asking what linguist was arguing. And he makes a very valid point. It was basically just this, that for a person to be rational in their belief, they should try to be at least semi-exhaustive of what could be possible other explanations that they have experienced with. Right. I mean, obviously it's non-exhaustive. I mean, there's no possible way you can work through every possible explanation, but you at least try. I mean, to jump to the conclusion that something supernatural to me would be irrational, right?
Yeah.
If I hear a creaky noise in the middle of the night, the first thing out of my mind is going to be a door rather than some kind of ghost, right?
It's a ghost opening the door, obviously.
Or maybe if I saw Steve, for example, maybe pull a rabbit out of a top hat, would I then be justified in concluding that he had genuine magical?
If you're a kid, if you're 4 years old, I think that's justificatory because it coherence with their understanding and their belief system, right? That doesn't mean the belief's correct. It doesn't mean that I have magical powers. But you, as an adult who understands the hat trick, and the rabbit is all stage magic, it's not real magic, it's an illusion, then you probably wouldn't be justified, right? Because it doesn't congeal with your existing coherency of your web of belief.
What we're talking about, though, is consistency. If you can't know what you can't know, and you've exhausted whatever, I think more of the jumping to conclusion instead of exhausting other options is something that does tend to happen, particularly if that thing that you're jumping to is more prominent in your life. So if you're going to church every day and you're reading your Bible every day, then that idea is going to be not only seem very likely to you, like probability, like you were saying, but also it's something that's so normalized and so that to be expected in those religions that you're not necessarily looking at the spectrum of the other possibilities that it could be.
That goes back to what I said when I first came in here, that many people just don't realize how implausible God really is, simply because their culture takes it for granted.
Right. No, that makes sense. If you're going to school, like if you're going to a Catholic school and you're going to church at least 2 times a week and you've got mass at school and this is being drilled into you constantly, then you're far more likely to not realize how unlikely that thing is at the end of the day.
Icarus makes a
It's
point.
normalized.
He says, and I kind of agree and I kind of disagree, but he says that's kind of how science works, right? In a way, but here's the thing with science. He says, you know, what he's saying is basically what scientists do when they have a claim that try to debunk yourself. Well, that's true. You try to make your explanation to be more likely than the null. However, there still is what conditions exist for a scientist to accept a claim, right? In science, we have a p-value and we have the significant alpha, and we can use statistical methods to say, okay, you're justified. But that only is justified for the science, to say the science is accepting this. It doesn't talk about dostastic things at all. The dostastic justification is completely irrelevant to the scientific inquiry. So what is about my belief? What it makes it about my particular belief that I say, hey, this explanation is sufficient to say I'm warranted to believe this?
Well, I think Stonebuck covers that a little bit, right? I'm of the opinion that personal experience isn't sufficient justification to believe in the existence of a god. The human mind is a frail and easily manipulated thing. So that's what it's about, though. It's your opinion and what you decide is going to be justified to you. Mm-hmm. If you then have like the same experience over and over and over again about this same god, then you might be more inclined to believe in that god. I'm getting a bit of an echo from atheists. Sorry. Oh, we're good now.
That's true.
But it's about your personal justification. But what we were saying earlier is that your personal justification should be consistent with external justifications.
Yeah, I don't see how you can say that personal experience isn't sufficient justification. It would definitely be personal experience, right? That is one of the most. There's something called an incorrigible belief, right? An incorrigible belief is a belief that is true by virtue that you believe it. Such as like if I say I've experienced pain, that's true. If I experience pain, right? I mean, I am experiencing pain, whether I am or not. If I believe that I am, there's pain there. Right?
Well,
there could be no physiological
bit,
reason for it.
Steve, the question might be a little bit unclear though, by saying our personal belief or our personal experience is good enough to believe in a god. They might not be considering the personal experience that they've had versus should another person's personal expect convince you.
Right. No, I get that, but he's still talking about himself though. Is he talking about himself or he's saying toward other people?
All he said was, I'm of the opinion that personal experience isn't sufficient. I think that could go either way.
Okay, but for himself, I agree with, but for somebody else, I would vehemently deny that, obviously, because.
Well, yeah, it's a matter of
clearly people can be justified to believe in God if they can justify it. I mean, that's.
I imagine though you would run into a pretty large problem in a lot of personal experiences being justified for most people as soon as you apply that external critique internally. Obviously it wouldn't apply to all of them, but I feel like there's a decent chance that a lot of people's personal beliefs or personal experiences would end up getting pushed to the side, and you'd end up with a smaller margin of personal experiences that actually even internally justified if they applied the same, like if they were to apply that questioning consistently across the board.
Well, like when it comes to religious experience, it's mainly a first person experience.
Right.
So
yeah, it's all your own sense data.
Yeah, that's why I mentioned on Twitter and also chat that would be primarily just a warranted belief, internal.
Do you use Plantinga's version of warrant? I think he actually uses warrant to have meaning internal justification versus justification for like onus to persuade somebody, right? Now I don't know if that's right, but
entirely different.
Yeah, in the autobiographical sense, yeah, it would
autobiographical
be within
sense,
that,
yeah.
within that context, yeah. But in dialectic, it's
That's how I interpret Plantinga, but I can't really get anybody to really confirm or deny. I think Plantinga's a little vague on it. I've looked into that very thing. Does he mean self-referential, autobiographical when he says warrant, or does he? Because if that's the case, why is he distinguishing that in any other type of justification?
I want to say he's using that particular context, just a personal warrant or a biographical, because in dialectic, when you're relating that experience, it's like Cheshire mentioned, there's the other experiences, and if you want to really come up with, like, say, a justification in dialectic, you're going to go beyond that personal experience and broaden. You can only incorporate more information, study it a little more critically, like other religions, philosophy, epistemology, history, theology. It takes more of a arithmetic to really build a coherent or a foundational for.
Well, that's why I would by no means say all personal experiences would be brushed aside. I just think a larger number would be there. There would still be some that would obviously convince some people, because keep in mind that level of justification is an individual level, and you're never going to get consistency among like all religious people to accept this. Like, that would be ridiculous, or all people to accept this level of scrutiny. So it's gonna vary based on your internal, like, whatever you decide is going to be convincing to you. However, at the same time, even if you can be consistent, just any bit of consistency, I don't care if you decide to believe every story that anybody told you ever, just be consistent.
What was your degree of religiosity growing up, Chesh? I mean, I know a little bit about your family, but to what degree do you think you held?
Up until probably mid high school, mid to late high school, I was evangelical. So
yeah,
I was
what
like
degree?
very
But what
much
degree? You were like
yeah, like all in, like going
You
to
were all in,
like
okay.
I was in church all of the time. The only time I would ask for it off of work. I was doing I did a lot of stuff with like additional groups outside of just regular church. I did a shitload of. I did enough volunteer work to get like 2 extra credits or some shit.
So what was your what was your justification then? Did you rely on other people? Because it seems like when I went to some Christian events,
I didn't have any.
Is that what you realize now? But you didn't realize then? You didn't have any justification?
At first, it wasn't important. Having it is what it is. It was what it was. It was just a fact. It was just the case. There was like the encouragement
you took it by
questioning.
fiat. There was like this is what else?
Yes.
Yeah, okay, I get you.
Yeah, exactly. So basically, the Bible justified itself. They could have put on a Kent Hovind video, and I would have been like, yeah, no, that totally makes sense. What a funny joke, Kent. Not funny.
What about you? Well, I'll get to Stone Butt here in a second. Let me ask atheist linguist, what was your degree of religiosity or conviction growing up? I mean, obviously you're atheist now because your name's atheist linguist, but what about prior?
My family was never very devout. My grandparents certainly believe in God, and they have a fairly moderate form of Christianity that they follow. Funny thing, I remember when I was like maybe 4 or 5 years old. We would always play the game where I would say, why did God give me, I don't know, 2 eyes or 2 ears or whatever? And then they would give some cutesy answer. And then I remember a few years later about how I was maybe about 10 years old maybe, and my paternal grandfather passed away, and I told my father, Grandpa lives on in two places now, in heaven and in our hearts. And that was about as religious as I ever got.
But you were questioning things because of the various things. By the way, they're very funny. Hey, Chesh, we're all very glad, by the way, to hear that you actually went to high school.
I'm insulted.
To the surprise of a lot of people.
I graduated high school because I had to graduate high school, otherwise I wouldn't have been able to drop out of university and college.
There you go. Hey, exactly. So,
I actually got to take off, though. This is really interesting, and I'm looking forward to watching the playback later on. Have a good night, guys.
Night,
so
Chesh.
let me ask Stonebutt, because he dropped in. So, Stonebutt, you don't think a theist is ever justified to believe a deity exists? Stonebutt, I saw you come in here.
Oh wait, let me back in for a second. I forgot. I have a premiere happening at the right after this is over at 11:30. So go over to my channel and watch that. It's art. It's only 5 minutes long. It'll be fun. See you later.
What time are you doing it?
11:30. It's just a premiere.
11:30. So that's 8:30 my time.
Yeah.
Oh, I got plenty of time. Yeah, I'm not gonna be that long. Yeah, I'm competing with Little Red. Little Red is tearing up the YouTube.
Can y'all hear me?
Yeah, she's doing really well, but
Later.
that's okay. I'm not about the views. I'm about the quality. Not saying that she doesn't have quality. I love Little Red, but she get more views.
You
I mean,
guys
it doesn't
are
bother
not
me.
even competing right now.
Yeah.
Talk to you later.
All right.
Chesh.
Hey, can y'all hear me?
Yeah, there we go, Stonebutt.
Okay. It's settings on my browser were weird. Hey, what was the question again?
Oh, you don't think that somebody can be justified to believe God exists? Anybody, or just you? Through personal experience or religious experience?
I really don't like the idea of having being able to justify anything through personal experience, because that can lead to some pretty awful things.
Well, how else do you justify
about
things, though? Everything we do is through personal experience. I mean, literally, all our information is filtered through some kind of sense perception. I mean, that's how we derive our beliefs.
Evidence.
Yeah, I mean, that's how we derive our beliefs. So I don't know why personal experience would be any different.
I mean, how are you defining personal experience?
Subjective sense data. Something we observe, we experience, we visually see, hear, tactile, whatever. It's some kind of experience that we have that to ourselves, which is subjective, meaning that we cannot transport it to somebody else, right? I can't let you feel my pain, right? It's not objective. So personal experience, I think, is one of the only reasons why I think that people probably should believe certain things, at least for a majority of the reason, through experience. I mean, it may not be the only reason. I'm not an experientialist kind of thing, but
I guess I had a different idea of what personal experience was.
Well, okay, so let's say a UFO came down, and they hijacked you and they took you to another planet and showed you around, brought you back to the Earth, and you say, hey, look, I literally went to another planet. Aliens exist. And I say, okay, you might think you're justified to believe that. It's going to be hard pressed to convince me because I've never seen anything like that, right? So it's not that I don't believe in the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. What I think it is that convince me, I have to have some kind of priors to draw upon, or at least have evidence that is more difficult for you to get, right? I mean, because you have to go get that evidence, right? It's not just your testimony. You actually have to go get that evidence of something along the lines of, okay, I got to go back to this planet. Now, had you filmed everything and recorded it, and you got soil samples, and you had all this scientific evidence that we can test and go, yeah, he's right, that's fine. But you just coming back with nothing would be very difficult to convince me. You would agree with that, probably, right? But you would be convinced, wouldn't you?
Well, maybe after a while, maybe I would believe that that it didn't happen. I mean, if there was like no evidence, nothing.
Well, I mean, but that's where people. Well, one, that's where people start second guessing themselves. That's what allows people to gaslight people. By the way, when you experience something that you know you experienced, and people tell you no, you didn't. Hey, no, Snowball, you didn't go to another planet. But I know I did. You know, I mean, they're not particularly gaslighting you because they're just not believing you. But I mean, even it's like the simplest things is where they're actually trying to convince you. They are trying to undermine your recollection of things, right? Your recall of experience. They're trying to say that didn't happen that way. But you know, we experience things. I know certain things have experienced me, like the religious experience I had. It did happen to me, right? What it was, who knows? But that really can't be undermined by anybody. I remember it, where I was. I remember what was going on. I remember sitting on the couch. This was an actual experience. It wasn't a dream. I remember the ride home. I mean, there's other people that were there. If you want to talk to my ex-girlfriend, she was there. You know, so there's validations to be had.
But how would I be able to, without any like evidence, how would I be able to tell that I really went to a different planet or I just had some sort of psychosis event?
Well, you would have to think to yourself, you know, you have to test your faculties, right? I mean, have you ever had psychosis before? I mean, do you have any reason did you go to a doctor? Were you on any kind of psychotic meds? But even then, people generally, when they have a psychotic episode as opposed to a real episode, I think there's a distinct difference that most people could probably recognize given some kind of therapy. But if you, for example, like let's say you went to another planet, you spent like 20 years of your life there and came back, kind of be hard pressed to kind of just forget, 20 years or change 20 years of your life. And why would it be that big a deal? Be like, hey, yeah, I went to that planet, big deal. To you, at that point, it'd be commonplace, right? At that point, like, okay, the rest of the world doesn't know this, but hey, there's a lot of stuff the rest of the world doesn't know that people know.
Come back to Earth as an ambassador for the planet Crouton.
Right? I'm just saying that, I think that personal experience is sufficient justification for an individual. I think it's very difficult like I said, I call it non-transportable justification. It's very hard to have personal experience be sufficient to somebody else. And this is where I think S.J. Thomason makes a mistake when she tries to argue that her beliefs are predicated upon the testimonies of the apostles. Because now you're saying, well, you're believing their personal experience, even though there's differences in their personal experience. You have no rapport with these people either, which makes a big difference. So, for example, if Cheshire tells me something, I have a rapport with Cheshire. So if she says she experienced something, I'm going to give her a little bit more benefit of the doubt, right? But for somebody who I've never had any experience with, that I know nothing about, they're just names in a book, why do I give them any credence for their validity, or their truthfulness, their veracity? I don't know why I would, given what they're saying. They're just names. Does that make sense? I mean, because I don't have any trust built with them to say, okay, this is more likely the case that they actually experienced this, and whether opposed to they thought they experienced something, they misunderstood, because historically that has been very often the case. People have misunderstood what they've experienced.
Yeah, that makes sense.
I just find it very hard to rely on testimony of biblical figures like that as an argument, right? That's why I think argument from religious experience only benefits oneself. I think that's only if somebody says, "Look, you believe in God." Okay, yeah. Why do you believe in God? Why have this religious experience? Okay, you can justify to somebody that, right? But maybe not so much justify it to somebody else. What do you got? Anything else to add on that, Stonebud, or anybody else? Got a couple people on here.
Pretty much all the thoughts I had on it.
By the way, the rest of people can come in here. There's a link. So let me ask atheist linguist real quick. So how'd you get involved in linguistics, if I can ask?
I started in high school. I took Spanish 1 my freshman year. I found that I really took to it. I was really good at it. So my Spanish teacher convinced me to take French the following year, and I spent the rest of high school taking both Spanish and French.
So you're a polyglot.
Yeah, sort of.
Sort of.
Let's see what happened with that. I started seeing all these correlations between Spanish and French, and for whatever reason, that really fascinated me. So,
Did you ever get into speech act theory?
What?
Did you ever get into speech act theory?
I've dabbled in that. I took a course in I think pragmatics, and that sort of touched on the idea of speech acts.
I'm fascinated by speech
Anyway.
act theory. I really am. I think speech act theory makes a lot of sense just to solve a lot of issues.
Yeah. So anyway, thereafter I went on to teach myself basic Italian, then Latin, and then eventually ancient Greek, and even Old English. That's my most.
So you from what if I remember, you finished. Did you?
Yeah.
If I remember correctly, you finished your PhD, right?
Yeah, I did. I had my virtual ceremony last Saturday, I believe.
That congratulations, by the way. Even though it's unfortunate because of the
thank you.
conditions of the world right now, but hey, you know what? Virtual ceremony. Still, hey, you got your doctorate, so I mean, huge props to you. Did you have to defend your thesis virtually too?
Yeah.
That would be hard.
I did it my Zoom.
So somebody actually asked you a question. They say, "Do you love Tolkien?" I found it fascinating that he created cultures and history just to provide a background to the languages that he made up.
Yeah, it's kind of funny that it's like that because I've actually developed a fictional language of my own, and I've sort of begun building a world around it.
But do you speak Klingon?
No, I don't speak a word of
Okay, let me ask you this:
no.
have you ever looked at Wittgenstein's private language argument?
What was that?
Have you ever looked at Wittgenstein's private language arguments, like Beetle in a Box?
No, I don't believe I've heard of that.
He basically argues that a privatized language of one doesn't really have any communication abilities. What good is a privatized language? And I see this often when I look at atheists that are trying to like come up with their own terminology for things. It's like we have words that we understood in the disciplines, right, in science and in philosophy, that are commonly used for a reason. They want to communicate a certain thing, right? And so, but I see all these atheists that want to turn it around. Like just recently, a couple of people in the atheist community, they want to like make the term anti-theist to mean somebody who believes that God does not exist. And it's like, wait a minute, we already that makes no sense. I mean, we actually the term anti-theist has been around a while. It's used in literature to denote somebody who's against the concept of God. It's against people believing in God and or against religion. That's how it's understood. How do you just randomly say no? We're going to make it be something completely different, right?
Oh wait, Steve. It goes even further. They want to make a term anti-theist agnostic.
Yeah, I don't know what the hell that means.
What?
I don't even know what that means. I know Matt used that phrase. Even
it's
Vi was
like trying to
Yeah, it's
Isn't
weird.
trying to change language like this like some shit of 1984?
I don't know the utility behind it. I don't see any utility behind it. Hey,
it
we got
makes
Rez
that
in here real
much-
quick. Rez, how are you?
Hello.
So, anything you would like to add on this?
I don't know. I think just the question itself kind of bothers me, since personal experience is the only thing we can. Like, what bothers me about the question is that personal experience can be used to justify all kinds of horrible things, and thus I don't think is very useful. For
Well,
instance, if you are ever mugged by a black man, you can then infer that all black people mug people.
Well, yeah, no. Here's the problem, though. That's a bad inference, though. Just because you can have sufficient justification through personal experience, you still have to have a degree of rationality to say this is why I hold the particular belief. If a position can be shown to be irrational, like the case you just mentioned, then it's not sufficient justification. You know, because you're
Right,
formulating a conclusion based upon irrationality. Right? In order to have a sufficient justification through personal experience, it still has to be formulated by rational thought processes.
Right, but I guess it's a little weird because personal experience is the only thing we can go by. Yet we still have ways of interpreting personal experience in a way that doesn't become, I guess, muddied, I guess is the word I'm looking for. Like, for instance, in the scientific method, the only reason we know why certain things are the way they are is because we can repeat the experiments and we can have other people repeat the experiments in order
Yeah, it's
to
objective,
confirm
right? It's objective.
the observations. Yeah, the objective
Because you can
reality,
repeat
quote
experience,
unquote.
that means that it literally is objective. You can do the experiment, get a result. Somebody else can, they can get a result. That's not subjective.
Right, but when it comes to like personal experience of God, if all you're getting is other people saying they had a personal experience of God, and yet there's nothing you can look at and say this is evidence of their personal experience of God, I don't think it's useful,
No,
and thus
I
the
agree with
question
that.
itself, it kind of destroys itself.
Because there's a lot of defeaters against it. If I give you my religious experience and say, look, I'm attributing this to God, there's a lot of defeaters against that, merely for the fact that throughout history, we've shown that most of these cases when we've seen religiosity or religious experience, it has been some other explanation, right? There's been a natural explanation of sorts. So it's as an inherent defeater by transmission of my testimony or my belief to somebody else. There's a lot of things weighing against that because we have a lot of evidence to say, well, what is more likely the case? And so I can't get beyond that barrier to transmit to you my personal experience, and that applies for anything, right? If I tell you that, hey, look, yesterday this happened to me, and I have no evidence for it doesn't have to be a religious experience, it could be anything. I did this yesterday, but I have absolutely no way to show you that I did this yesterday. You know, I can't convince you of it because, you know, now you might say, hey, look, you know, I trust Steve. It's a mundane claim. I'm not going to waste my time doubting it. And yeah, sure, I believe him. That's fine, right? Because one, you know me, so there's a rapport there. Two, you've seen mundane claims happen, right? If I say, hey, I went to the store yesterday, but I didn't get a receipt, you're like, hey, you know what? People go to the store, you know? So again, it's really based upon, one, the difficulty of getting evidence. That's what they would call an extraordinary claim. Anyway, it's not. It's just, it means it's a claim that's more difficult to get evidence for. And two, past experience. Not having past experience with God as a causal mechanism, or causal explanation to have a mechanism for phenomenon is very difficult to get past. I'm still processing that myself. How did I ever get from my experience to God? There's no link there unless people have told me that. There's no way I could have causally, objectively said to myself, this is what I'm experiencing. Now, what is the explanation? Without other people getting it from other sources, right? So how does a religious person get to their deity of choice through what they would be considered to be a religious experience? Anyway?
Yeah, I feel like the question itself is self-defeating.
Do you think it's self-defeating for the individual or for somebody else? Like, if God came down to you and say, "Hey, look, I exist," you know.
Well, I would immediately check my pulse. Would be the first thing I do.
Just say everything checks out. I mean, it's all for all practical purposes. You are experiencing something. Would you be justified to believe that's God? I think absolutely yes. Why not?
I don't know. I think if you leap to that being God is the first thing you do, I don't think you're in a clear state of mind.
No, that's fine too. I mean, yeah. I mean, like I said, if the sky opened up and chariots came forth and trumpets herald and the stars all rearranged themselves and said, you know, I am Jehovah or Allah, whatever. Yeah, you'd be like, hey, there's something going on here, and you should think about what are the possibilities here. But I mean, I think if there actually is a deity, he could manifest in a way that would be pretty convincing to people, right? Like, for example, like it's somebody who died, like literally they're dead. They're, you know, a month later, you know, you see the skeleton, all of a sudden they corporealize, and they become, you know, fully alive again. I'm going to take that as a supernatural event, and I'm going to go, yeah, you know what, this something caused this. I think it'd be personally justified to say, okay, there's a God now, but I still would have a problem with that correlation. It'd be like, okay, something caused this. This person became alive when they were dead. I would call that supernatural. Sure, it would justify to me completely believing the supernatural by all stretch of imagination.
Well, maybe this is just my over-imaginative, like, love of sci-fi. I want to check that person for, like, maybe they got nanites in their blood or something with some kind of experimental technology that could reverse necrotizing of tissue, but I don't know.
Yeah, I wouldn't buy that.
I want to eliminate all possibilities first.
Death is death.
Well, wouldn't it be impossible to like naturally like replicate a person's like complete consciousness? Like after they die,
I tend to think not. Now I think other people would disagree. But what do you think?
I mean, you would have to get like every single atom and electron in their brain like perfectly correct.
Well, I mean, if you look at orchestrated reductionism by Penrose, you know, he thinks that consciousness comes from quantum fluctuations and microtubules, so it's on the quantum level, right? Orchestrated, it's called ORCO-R. Orchestrated objective reductionism. Is that what it is? I think so. But what do you think, atheist linguist? Were you trying to say something?
We can't replicate a person's consciousness yet, but we may be able to at some time in the future.
You think that science can develop to the point where we could bring back the dead, like clinically dead? Because I'm going to go with no on that.
Have you done that?
I'm going to go with no.
I'm going no.
Yeah, and so that to me would be something that would be supernatural. Because again, we want to differentiate between normal, what we consider to be mundane events, as opposed to something that's completely out of the ordinary, right? That's where we have the term supernatural. Some people argue, well, if it was part of the natural world, it would be natural. I disagree. I think that we're trying to convey a concept here, and the concept of supernatural is something that we don't have physical. There's something that breaks the laws of physical reality, and that we have no way of predicting in any way, shape, or form. And so when we see something so out of the ordinary, like a person being resurrected, yeah, I'm going to go with supernatural with that. It just to me, it makes sense that that's what we're talking about. Now, somebody can say, well, it's aliens, it's microbes. Yeah, even then, I don't think an alien race with the next technology to bring back the dead, I'm going to still call that supernatural.
Well, I mean, like... Oh, sorry, go on.
The problem is, as improbable as those possibilities are, they're still more probable than anything supernatural.
You're saying that everything is more likely than supernatural? Than any natural explanation? I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I agree with that. But like Skeptic 77 made the point I was trying to articulate without actually saying the quote, but any sufficiently advanced technology is indistinguishable.
Yeah, but we're not talking about magic,
from
though.
magic.
I think that's an erroneous statement to make, though, because we're not talking
like, for
about
instance,
magic.
I've already made this example before, though, but if, like, God ripped open the heavens from above the clouds and poked his massive face through, and I looked around and everyone was seeing the same thing I was seeing, and then we could, like, because we've got all kinds of recording devices going on and everything, I'm sure somebody probably recorded it with something, and then we looked back and we could analyze it and make sure it wasn't just some kind of elaborate illusion like a hologram or something going on. That would be, for me, even if later on down the line as humanity got more advanced and we look back at that and then said no, that was fake, it turns out it was fake, I think in that moment
You'd be justified.
if we analyze it to the best of our ability and come up with nothing, I think that is justifiable to then believe it was supernatural
I agree
for
with you
the
on
time being, even if it's down the line analyzed with more advanced technology.
I think I have no problem with that, right? Because you're not claiming knowledge, right? You're just claiming that you've been convinced to the point of believing, right? We're not talking about knowledge. We're not even going to go there. But I think you're right. I think a person is justified to be convinced that, you know, this is a case. But you know what? That's open to revision. Beliefs are tentative. You're open to revision, giving more information. And if it was some elaborate alien race that did some kind of hologram thing, hey, you know what? That's still pretty cool. I wouldn't feel guilty. Yeah. I'd be like, hey, you know what? I thought it was God, but it was wrong. But hey, you know what? It's still pretty cool that we have aliens out there. I wouldn't have a problem with it. I think though, a lot of people don't want to be wrong. A lot of people really hate the fact that their beliefs can be wrong. And so when you have something like that, they'll try to do anything possible to make sure that their belief isn't wrong. Even to the point, I think, of a lot of times, you know, willfully negating actual facts. I've seen this happen multiple times with, like, even math. Like, you know, when people say, you know, 0.99 repeat equals 1, they'll say, hey, look, that's not true. And you're like, it's math, it's objective. Here, you know, here's the proof. But they don't want to be wrong. So they're just like, nope, this can't be the case. And I'm like, but you're wrong. You know, I've seen it happen too many times.
I think growing up in a religious background and then finding out later on it was nothing but bullshit, at least from my perspective, I feel like that has pushed me to make absolutely sure that what I think I'm experiencing is actually happening. So I would require at least a few dozen other people to have witnessed the same event before I go, okay, maybe it was real. Because I don't want to be put in that situation again where I'm believing something that's untrue.
Micro says, if there was an alternative dimension reality that could interact with our reality, would you call it supernatural or just natural with a border definition of natural? I'd call it preternatural, because, look, we might have multiple dimensions we can't see. I mean, string theory, we know that has up to 13 dimensions. And so these things would be something along the lines of, okay, we have an expectation there might be multiple dimensions. So I don't really call that supernatural. Now, if we had a dimension where all of a sudden you go into it and we're back in, like, King Arthur days and flying dragons exist and wizardry exists, and yeah, I would call that supernatural. But that's not what we talk about, multiple dimensions. Multiple dimensions are literally just compactifications of existing dimensions in smaller, like, space, metric space. So yeah, I'm not going to call that supernatural at all, but it depends on what you mean by multiple dimensions. Yeah, go ahead.
How would you propose to distinguish between the genuinely supernatural and something natural that just...
Well, and it's hard to do. No, it really is hard to do. What we mean by natural, what we mean by supernatural. How do you distinguish between one and the other? For example, the dragons, for example. The question is, how it's possible that we stumbled into a completely natural dimension that it just happened to resemble our traditional
notion of the supernatural.
No, sure. And look, when it comes to like dragons, right? Do you think there's a possibility?
Yeah.
Again, just somebody, and again, I don't know when the first dinosaur was discovered. It was long after, I think, well, officially, I think it was long after medieval times. But let's say somebody did run across an oddly shaped skull or something like that, or like a Komodo dragon or something along those lines, where they're like, hey, this is, I'm going to call this a dragon, and it's going to breathe fire. They had some mythos with it, right? Do I ever think that actually dragons existed? No, of course not. They're mythological creatures, but I can see how man tries to have explanations for things that they didn't have understanding of, especially way back when. We have greater understanding. Our hindsight is much better now, right? So we at least say, there's far less likely a chance of a supernatural causation than it would have been, 1,000, 2,000 years ago. So do you think that maybe in 1,000, 2,000 years from now, there may not be anybody who thinks there's a supernatural causation? Maybe, religion might even be a thing of the past, maybe, because there's no need to explain anything any longer.
I mean, that's my hope. But I feel like as time moves forward and science advances, the supernatural has less and less places to hide. But at the same time, we're also creating what essentially would be magic to people 100, 200, 500 years ago. So it's very perspective based, and it's kind of weird because let's say you thrust someone from 500 years ago into the current present, and we have the internet, we have mobile phones where people communicate with people on the opposite side of the globe. There is a globe, like all kinds of things, and like thrusting rockets into orbits and to other worlds and celestial objects that they worshipped as gods 500 years ago, or more like 1,000 years ago plus. But it's very perspective based, and I feel like what we do today might seem like magic to people way back when, but it's also going to seem so mundane and ordinary and boring compared to people 1,000 years from now.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Yeah, if what we have today, a computer would be magical to somebody 1,000 years ago, clearly. But 1,000 years from now, things are going to be less and less clearly magical. They'd be like, and even still though, if we went in the future and we saw some amazing technology 10,000 years in the future, we're not going to go, this is magic. We're going to be like, this is just technology we don't understand, because we are at the point now to recognize technology can do amazing things. So if they've developed some kind of awesome supercomputer that can do all kinds of cool stuff and quantum computing, and we go, hey, look, this is amazing technology. I don't have a clue how it works. You and I would be knowing better to go, hey, this is still natural. This is still has an actual explanation. We just are not smart enough or educated enough or informed enough to know what it is, right? Because you and I don't know quantum computing very well.
I mean,
well,
even
I don't know
high
quantum computing at all, so.
Even like high dimensional thinking and math that's expressed in sci-fi, like in movies like Interstellar, it still seems like magic to us because it just seems so far and away ahead of any kind of thinking we could do, but it might not even be that fantastical when they finally get to that point.
Well, let's analyze that. Okay, so like the black hole and Interstellar, they had based upon modeling, right? Now, we have never seen a black hole before. We've never observed one until that time. The M87 was the first black hole we ever directly observed, and they waited for years, I think it was, to process that. We have nothing to compare it to, right? There's no comparator because we've never seen one before. But we had what was modeling. We had an expectation. We said if we observe something to be a black hole like M87, what would we expect based upon what we understand for the laws of physics? We put all those laws in a computer, did simulations, and said, hey, look, something similar to this. That's what Interstellar did. And lo and behold, M87, when we looked at it, met our expectations, right? And so we were to say, hey, you know what? What's the most likely explanation for this? It's a black hole. Now, if we had imaged M87, it was nothing like we expected, we might have had a problem, right? But you got to admit, there was no priors to that. So when we say, should we believe this is a black hole, you can't say, well, am I justified to believe this black hole? There's no priors to have that justification. The justification is based upon not on priors, but it's based on expectations. This is what I'm saying. It's a balance.
There have been many layers of research and time and thought from many brilliant minds put into that. So I'm not surprised that what we guessed actually turned out to be correct. When we finally actually got a snapshot of a black hole, it matched almost perfectly with what we would have expected. That
No,
doesn't
it doesn't surprise me
I
at
was,
all. No, not at all.
Well,
But what
I
I'm
was
saying
more
is,
talking about the.
but if you
I
ask
was more
somebody, do you
talking
believe
about-
this is the black hole that you're looking at? Well, they can't say, well, yeah, I'm justified to believe this is a black hole because I've seen black holes before. There's been no priors, right? So you can't just say that priors are the only thing we base upon justifications or warrant to believe something. We have to base it upon multiple things, one of which is, well, what is our expectations? When it comes to God, not only there's no priors, what is their expectations? I don't know. I would like a theist to tell me what their expectations are if God exists.
Right, but what I was more getting at, like the way they sort of introduced the fourth dimension of time as an actual physical extra dimensional space, and also the wormhole, and like the way they sort of visualize these extra dimensional spaces, we can't even really theorize at the moment. They may not even be as fantastical as they're presented now to us because it seems so far ahead of where we are. So they might end up being more mundane when we actually get to that point, is what I'm saying.
No, I don't think they're going to be mundane at all. But I mean, I think that it demonstrates that our understanding of physics, our understanding of relativity, is pretty damn good. Now, I think general relativity obviously it's not compatible with quantum loop gravity. There's some incompatibility issues there. However, just like Newtonian physics, it worked for what we used it for. When we saw Mercury, Mercury has a yearly path around the sun of 88 days, right? And when we looked at the perturbations in Mercury's orbit, Newtonian physics couldn't account for that. That doesn't mean Newtonian physics were falsified. This is why I think Karl Popper's falsification criterion is nice in theory, but just some observations do not necessarily falsify an entire theory. It just means that theory has not incorporated what it needs to incorporate to explain it. You don't throw the baby out with the bathwater kind of thing, right? We didn't throw away Newtonian physics when we couldn't account for perturbations in Mercury's orbit. But general relativity came along, and not only did it explain all of Newtonian physics, it actually explained our observations. Now we have some issues going, well, Newtonian relativity doesn't explain everything either. Do we throw it out? No. We say there might be something we're missing here, and then we look for that. But all these black hole observations really do confirm general relativity works because of the modeling. I mean, the modeling, what was our expectations? The modeling based upon, what the computer simulations had.
Yep, can't disagree with any of that.
Yeah, throwing the baby out with the bathwater.
Yeah.
That's what.
Well, do you subscribe to falsification? 'Cause I think it's nice in theory, but I don't know. When it comes to certain things like falsification criteria, verificationism, I don't put too much stock in them any longer. I kind of used to do in the day. I was like, yeah, for a robust scientific theory, it should have a falsification criteria. But then I kind of thought more of it. And I'm like, what would that? What actually would it be a falsification for certain theories? It just means that we haven't developed that theory well enough to explain what we're missing here.
Well, I guess it would mean you'd have to revise some of the issues that you're missing out on with the theory.
Yeah. But anyways, I'm going to bring this to a close. I got another plan tonight that I didn't know about. Well, just somebody wants to hang out tonight. So, but anyways, this was fun. We are going to do Rum and Coke tomorrow. We got Landon coming in tomorrow. We also got Justin.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, and Justin is that new guy that talks about poverty, and his videos are really good. But I think it's going to be really interesting because we're going to be talking about all kinds of, stuff relating to what he does. And I think it's going to be kind of new to the community about people reaching out, helping people, because that's kind of what we do around here. I want to help him start his channel a little bit. He seems like a real nice guy, and he didn't know how to get started with all this. So I know a lot of people have tried. I know like Little Red, she's starting her channel, and she's doing really well. And so I think tomorrow we're just all going to hang out and just drink and have a little fun. Sound like a plan?
Cool.
Yeah.
All right, guys. Well, this was, like I said, this was fun. Monday, we've got Caffeine Corner, 11 o'clock. We're going to be going over Narcissism Part 2, I believe. So, guess we'll see you then.
Narcissism.
Yeah. Well, we had one 2 weeks ago, but it was such a big topic, so we need to do part 2. So. All right. Good night, guys.
You know,
Good night,
Night.
Steve.